Poor girl mistook her new millionaire boss for a waiter. What he did next shocked everyone. It was supposed to be just another corporate event, except Leia couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place. Her heels hurt, the tight dress made her feel suffocated, and she kept reminding herself, just act confident. Then, in a crowded ballroom, a man in a tuxedo walked by. He looked like he belonged, not like the rest of the waitstaff. But Leia, trying to keep her cool, confidently called out, "Waiter, could you bring me a glass of champagne, please?" The man stopped, slowly turning around to face her with a look of confusion mixed with amusement. He handed her the drink and muttered, "Your champagne, miss," before walking away. Minutes later, the lights dimmed, the microphone crackled, and the crowd went silent. Ladies and gentlemen, it's with great pleasure we welcome our new CEO, Nicholas Smith. Leia froze, her heart pounding as the man who just handed her a drink, the waiter she had so confidently ordered from, walked up to the stage. The CEO, Nicholas Smith. Leia stood in front of the mirror, trying to smooth down the wrinkles of the tight dress she had rented for the corporate event. Her reflection was a blend of uncertainty and forced confidence. The dress clung to her in all the wrong ways, and the high heels were doing nothing to help her posture. She hated everything about corporate events, especially the part where she had to pretend to fit in. "Just act like you know what you're doing," she murmured to herself, adjusting the glass of orange juice in her hand as if it were champagne, willing herself to act the part of someone who belonged here. The noise of the ballroom buzzed around her, people laughing, glasses clinking, the sound of heels echoing across the marble floor. Leia wasn't one for these kinds of events. She'd only been working at the company for 2 months, and the air of power and success that surrounded her was as thick as the perfume in the room. She felt small, invisible. But tonight, she had to push all that aside. She had to pretend to be someone who could stand in a room full of billionaires and not feel like a fraud. Her gaze wandered across the crowd, over the sharp suits and polished smiles, until she noticed him. A man in a tuxedo, moving through the crowd with the grace of someone who had mastered every social occasion. He was tall, with dark hair that was just a little too perfect, and a posture that screamed power without him even having to try. He walked past her, and in the blur of the evening, Leia's mind scrambled for something, anything to hold on to. She stood up a little straighter, trying to look like she belonged, like she knew how to navigate this world. Her mouth dry, she called out with forced confidence, "Waiter, could you bring me a glass of champagne, please?" The man stopped. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing in confusion, as though he had just heard someone say the sky was green. For a second, time seemed to stretch. Leia held her breath, trying to stay composed while her heart hammered against her chest. He blinked, the smallest flicker of amusement crossing his face, but he didn't say a word. He just nodded, a strange look in his eyes, and walked away. Leia exhaled, relieved for a moment, before telling herself, just keep it together. She was so sure of herself, so confident in her offhand comment, but now, with every second that passed, the reality of what she had done set in. "You've just embarrassed yourself in front of the new CEO of the company." Minutes later, the lights dimmed and the room fell silent. A voice rang out over the microphone. "Good evening, everyone. It's with great pleasure we welcome the new CEO of our company. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause for Nicholas Smith." Leia's breath caught in her chest, the room seeming to swirl around her as her eyes darted toward the stage. The man who had just been the waiter was now standing there, in front of hundreds of people, taking the microphone. Nicholas Smith, the CEO? Her pulse thundered in her ears as she looked at him, realizing with complete horror that the man she had mistaken for a waiter was the very man who had the power to control the future of the company. And now, for reasons she didn't fully understand, he knew who she was. She had ordered champagne from the CEO of the company. She felt her skin flush with embarrassment, the heat creeping up her neck, but she tried to keep her face blank. She couldn't let anyone see the extent of her mistake or the internal panic that was building. She tried to breathe, but the air felt too thin. She was trapped in the worst kind of spiral, where every thought, every movement felt like it was on display for everyone to see. As Nicholas spoke on stage, Leia's mind was stuck on one thing. He smiled. It was subtle, Barely noticeable to anyone else, but it was there. A small, almost imperceptible curve of his lips. The same look he had given her just minutes ago when he had handed her the champagne. That look, calm, amused, almost intrigued. Her head spun with the thought, had he recognized me? "Brilliant, Leia," she whispered to herself under her breath. "You've just sent the CEO to get your drink. How's that for a promising career?" The speech was just a blur, his voice deep and steady droned on in the background. But she couldn't focus. The realization of what had just happened, the enormity of it, consumed her thoughts. She couldn't help but replay the entire moment in her head, the sound of her voice calling out, his confused expression, and the look in his eyes as he handed her the drink. When the speech ended and the applause began, Leia felt like she might collapse in on herself. People around her were clapping, laughing, engaging in small talk, but she felt like an outsider. As Nicholas left the stage, his eyes scanned the room. And then, they found hers. For a second, everything else fell away. His gaze locked onto hers, that same unreadable smile still playing at the corner of his mouth. He wasn't just the CEO anymore. He was the man she had mistreated, the man she had embarrassed herself in front of. Leia tried to steady her nerves, but her heart was hammering, each beat a reminder of the mistake she had made. She wanted to run, to hide, to pretend it had never happened. But it had, and now she would have to face the consequences. Chapter 1. The Mistake. Leia stood by the crowd, her palms slick with nervous sweat, watching as the glittering lights of the ballroom blurred together. She could hear the soft hum of music, the clink of glasses, and the murmur of voices, but none of it mattered. It was all just noise, all just a reminder that she didn't belong here. She adjusted her tight dress once more, trying to make herself appear as graceful as the women around her. She had no idea how to act in these corporate events. She wasn't like them. She didn't have a fancy wardrobe or a polished persona. She just had her job. A job she was lucky to have. A job she needed to keep. Trying to stay in the shadows, she found a quiet corner near the bar and grabbed a glass of orange juice, telling herself it might as well be champagne. She sipped it quickly, trying to force the discomfort from her throat. "Just act confident," she whispered to herself, as if repeating it could make it true. And then, in the middle of her awkward self-talk, the man appeared. He was tall, sharp, and moving through the crowd with the ease of someone who had been in this world for years. He wore a black tuxedo, the kind that would make anyone in a room take notice. His posture was perfect, and there was a quiet confidence in the way he moved that made him stand out, almost like he belonged to the space itself. He passed right by her, barely even noticing her, but for some reason, that's when her nerves got the best of her. "Waiter," she called out, the words slipping from her lips before she had a chance to think. It wasn't a shout, but it was firm, a command almost. She expected him to turn and simply nod, maybe offer a polite smile before going on his way. But instead, he stopped. The man turned slowly, his eyes scanning her face as if searching for some hint of a joke. Her heart skipped a beat. Did he know? Was he aware of how stupid she must look right now? "Could you bring me a glass of champagne, please?" Leia said, forcing a smile. Her voice was shaky, but she did her best to sound confident. The man stood still for a moment, blinking at her. Then, as if processing the request, he finally nodded, an unreadable expression on his face. He didn't say anything. He simply turned and walked away. Leia exhaled a long breath. She had done it. She had just embarrassed herself in front of someone who probably worked here. A waiter, a staff member, someone far beneath the glass walls and polished floors of the ballroom. She quickly told herself it didn't matter. It was just a mistake, a harmless slip-up. But even as she repeated the mantra, she couldn't shake the feeling that the incident was somehow going to come back to haunt her. Minutes passed, and she distracted herself with the glass of juice in her hand, trying to shake the feeling that someone was watching her. And then the lights dimmed. A microphone crackled, and the room went silent as the host's voice boomed across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," they began, "it is with great pleasure that we welcome the new CEO of our company." Leia didn't even have time to react as the name echoed through the room before the man she had just mistaken for a waiter, stepped onto the stage. "Nicholas Smith," the voice continued, "our new CEO." Leia froze. Her throat went dry. Her heart raced. The man on the stage, speaking confidently into the microphone, was the same man who had just handed her the champagne. Her mind scrambled, trying to make sense of it, trying to figure out how she could disappear into the floor. The CEO, the new CEO, the one who had smiled at her, the one she had dared to call a waiter. A million thoughts raced through her head, each one worse than the last. He had heard her. He knew who she was. And worse yet, he was probably thinking about it right now, that moment, the moment she had so confidently ordered from him. Her face burned with embarrassment, her pulse quickened. How could I be so stupid? The thought kept repeating, over and over in her mind. She caught his eyes just for a split second as he glanced out over the crowd. He didn't look at her with anger or distaste. Instead, he smiled again, a small, almost imperceptible smile, like a secret between them. But it wasn't a smile of amusement. It wasn't mocking. It was something else. Something deeper? Intrigued? Pity? Leia couldn't tell, but she couldn't look away either. The moment stretched on as he continued with his speech, but Leia's mind was stuck on that brief connection, the fleeting glance that now felt like 1,000 eyes staring directly at her. Her heart hammered in her chest. She wanted to leave. She wanted to disappear from the room altogether. But she stayed. She couldn't leave. She had to stay, even if every part of her screamed to run. As Nicholas finished his speech, the applause filled the room, and Leia was still frozen in her seat. The lights flickered back on, and the room slowly began to fill with chatter again. But for Leia, time felt like it had stopped. She told herself to act normal, to keep her composure. But as Nicholas turned away from the stage, his eyes locked on hers again, and that smile returned. Calm, amused, intrigued. For the first time, Leia realized that this man she had embarrassed herself in front of, wasn't just the CEO of the company. He was now in her life, in a way she couldn't ignore. She had no idea what this meant, but she knew one thing for sure. Their paths had just crossed in a way neither of them could have predicted. The mistake, the terrible mistake, had only just begun to shape everything that would follow. Chapter 2. The First Reveal. Leia could feel the weight of the room pressing down on her. The applause was deafening as Nicholas stepped down from the stage, his eyes scanning the crowd with practiced ease. Her heart was still pounding, her breath still shallow, but she couldn't shake the image of his smile. That knowing, almost amused smile that had haunted her ever since the moment she had mistook him for a waiter. What did he think of me? She tried to distract herself by focusing on the chatter around her, the faces and laughter of the other employees. But it was like she couldn't escape the echo of her own voice in her head, ordering champagne from the new CEO of the company. "Leia? Are you okay?" Clara's voice broke through the chaos, pulling Leia from her thoughts. Clara, from marketing, had been eyeing her ever since Leia had arrived at the event, no doubt trying to figure out if she was some new hire with potential or just another one-time worker. Her eyes widened when she noticed Leia's pale face. Yeah, just got a little lightheaded," Leia lied, trying to keep her cool. "Thanks for asking." Clara gave her an unsure look but then shrugged. "Well, come on, we should get a better view of the speech." Leia nodded absently, following Clara deeper into the crowd, trying to hold it together. Act confident," she repeated to herself, but it felt like the room was spinning faster than she could catch up. As they pushed their way through the crowd, Leia spotted him again, Nicholas, now mingling with other executives, his presence impossible to ignore. He moved through the room like a predator, effortlessly commanding attention. The man she had called a waiter just moments ago, he didn't even seem to notice her as he passed. But Leia could feel his eyes on her. Does he remember me? Before she could let herself spiral into more panic, the atmosphere shifted. The room suddenly became still, the whispers faded, and the microphone crackled once again. "Please welcome to the stage our new CEO, Nicholas Smith." Leia's chest tightened. The entire room turned in unison, eyes fixed on the stage, except for her. She stood still, frozen in place, unable to tear her gaze away from Nicholas as he walked back up to the podium. His every movement was poised, controlled. But there was something else there too, something more than the cold corporate demeanor he wore like armor. It was the faintest smile playing at the corner of his mouth, just for a second, when his eyes met hers. She quickly looked away, her face burning. The moment stretched too long, too real, as though the whole world knew the mistake she had made. The speech was long, and Leia barely heard a word. All she could focus on was the lingering feeling of Nicolas's gaze. It was like he could see through the walls she had built around herself. It made her uncomfortable, exposed, but also curiously seen in a way she had never felt before. She tried to shake the feeling, but it clung to her like a second skin. As the applause broke out once more, Leia remained motionless, her body rooted to the spot. The moment was too intense, too charged. She couldn't bear it. "I think you need some air," Clara said softly beside her, sensing Leia's unease. "Come on, let's get out of here." Leia nodded, allowing herself to be led toward the back doors of the ballroom, her mind racing. The cold air hit her like a slap in the face as they stepped outside. The city lights twinkled around them, the cool breeze of Manhattan sharp against her skin. "What's going on with you?" Clara asked, concern written all over her face. "You don't look well." "I'm fine, really," Leia lied again, her voice shaky. She forced herself to breathe deeply, steadying her nerves. Just overwhelmed, I guess." Clara didn't buy it, but she let it go, handing Leia a bottle of water from her bag. They stood in silence for a few moments, letting the cool night air calm their racing hearts. But Leia couldn't shake the feeling of Nicholas's eyes on her, of his strange smile. He hadn't said a word, but his presence felt like a constant, weighty pull. Back inside the ballroom, Nicholas stood near the bar, chatting with a few senior executives. His presence was commanding, like he was the center of everything. And despite all the people around him, it seemed as though he was the only one Leia could see. "Are you sure you're all right?" Clara asked again, noticing Leia's distant expression. Leia forced a smile. "Yeah, I just need to gather myself." She stepped toward the door, ready to escape, but just as she did, a voice called out. "Leia!" Her breath caught. She turned slowly, her heart leaping into her throat. There, standing in the doorway, was Nicholas. His eyes locked onto hers, and for the briefest moment, everything else faded away. The crowd of executives parted slightly as he made his way toward her, his sharp tuxedo jacket hugging his frame. The distance between them seemed to stretch longer than it was, and Leia could feel the butterflies in her stomach. "Ms. Moreira," he said, his voice soft but firm. His gaze seemed to linger just a moment too long. "I hope you're enjoying the evening." Leia swallowed, the words catching in her throat. "You're the one who handed me champagne," she wanted to say. "You're the one who probably thinks I'm an idiot." "Yes," she managed to say, the words coming out too quickly. "I'm just adjusting." He raised an eyebrow, a subtle smile tugging at his lips. "Good," he said simply, his gaze intense, probing. "I'm sure you'll adjust just fine." Leia blinked, trying to make sense of the conversation, but before she could respond, he turned slightly, his attention drawn back to the crowd. "Enjoy the rest of your evening, Leia," he said, his voice cool and confident. She stood there, frozen, watching him move back into the crowd, his presence still heavy in the air, even after he was gone. As the night wore on, Leia couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, not just in the room, but in her. Why did he look at me like that? She could still feel the weight of his gaze, like he had seen something in her. Something beyond the mistake she had made, beyond the awkwardness. And for the first time that evening, Leia found herself wondering if maybe, just maybe, this night would change everything. Chapter 3. A meeting that changes everything. The days after the corporate event were a blur. The morning after the dinner, Leia had gone straight into work, her thoughts still swirling with the awkwardness of the night before. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Nicholas Smith's face, his calm, unreadable expression, that brief, almost imperceptible smile when their eyes had locked. It had been a mistake, a big one. She'd told herself 100 times that he probably didn't remember her, didn't care. He was the CEO, after all. He dealt with hundreds of people every day. He had more important things on his mind than a junior marketing assistant who'd called him a waiter. But the smile kept haunting her, the way he had looked at her, like he saw something more that no one else had noticed. She was just about to settle into her daily routine when her phone buzzed. "You are required in Mr. Smith's office at 11 a.m. today. Please arrive promptly." Leia's stomach dropped. Mr. Smith's office? The words didn't even make sense to her. She had only been at the company for 2 months. Why would the CEO want to see her? She wasn't exactly in the inner circle. Maybe it's a mistake, she thought. Maybe he just wants someone from marketing for something. But as the clock ticked closer to 11 o'clock, Leia couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. Something was coming. At exactly 11 o'clock a.m., Leia stood in front of the towering glass doors of Nicholas Smith's office, her heart pounding in her chest. She hesitated for a moment, taking a deep breath before pushing the door open. Inside, the room was quiet, the blinds drawn so that the city outside was little more than a smudge of gray beneath the low afternoon light. Nicholas stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to her, hands clasped behind his back. "Come in, Miss Moreira," he said without turning around. Leia stepped inside, her steps hesitant. "Mr. Smith?" she greeted, her voice more nervous than she would have liked. "Please, have a seat." He gestured to the chair in front of his desk, his tone professional, but his posture seemed relaxed. Leia sat down, clutching her purse in her lap as if it were a shield. Her heart was racing, her palms sweating. What could he possibly want with me? "I trust you're settling in well," he asked, finally turning around to face her. She nodded quickly, trying to keep her composure. "Yes, Mr. Smith. Everything is going well." "Good," he replied. He paused for a moment, his eyes scanning her face, and then, as if making a decision, he stepped around the desk and leaned casually against the edge, his gaze never leaving hers. "I'm not here to talk about your performance in marketing," he said, his voice lowering slightly. "In fact, I'm here to talk about something different." Leia's breath caught. "What does he mean by different?" "Are you familiar with the new executive role we're creating?" he continued, his tone smooth, almost too casual. Leia frowned slightly. I've heard whispers about it, but I didn't think it was something I'd be considered for." "Not just considered for," he said, his lips curling into the faintest of smiles. "Offered." Leia blinked, the words not registering at first. "Offered?" Nicholas's gaze softened, just a little. "Yes. I've been watching the team. Your work has been impressive, and I think it's time we brought someone into the inner circle. Someone who isn't afraid to speak their mind, someone with, how should I put it, boldness?" Leia's heart skipped a beat. Was he talking about her? "Boldness?" she repeated, trying to mask the shock in her voice. "You're not like the others here," Nicholas said. There was something in his voice now, a quiet respect. "I respect that. You don't bow down to the hierarchy like the rest of them. You speak your mind. You don't just nod and agree because it's what everyone expects." Leia's pulse quickened. She had always prided herself on not blending in with the crowd, on not playing the game. But this was different. He was offering her something. A chance. But why? "I want you to come on board as my personal assistant," he said, watching her closely. "You'll be my eyes and ears in the company. I need someone I can trust. Someone who's not afraid to challenge me. It's a temporary role. 3 weeks at most. After that, if you're a good fit, I'll have a permanent position for you. If not, you go back to marketing." Leia's mind was racing. This was an opportunity, but could she take it? It meant spending more time with him, the man who had already shaken her up more than she wanted. "Why me?" she asked, her voice small. Nicholas raised an eyebrow, his gaze sharpening slightly. "Because, Miss Moreira, you're not afraid of me." He paused, letting that sink in. "And I like that in a person." Leia could feel her pulse thudding in her throat. He likes it. He really likes it. But the question still lingered. Why her? There were hundreds of employees in this company. What made her stand out? "Think about it," he said, stepping away from his desk. It's a chance to be closer to the decision-making, to see the company from the top. You'll be with me every day. All you have to do is prove that you're capable of more than just marketing." Leia swallowed hard. This was too much. Too sudden. But she was tempted. No, more than tempted. The thought of working so closely with him, being part of something bigger, was thrilling. "I'll take it," she said, before her mind could fully catch up with her words. Nicholas smiled, his eyes flickering with something unreadable. "Good. I'm glad you understand the opportunity. Welcome to my team, Miss Moreira." As she left his office, Leia's heart was still racing. She had done it. She had accepted an offer she never could have imagined, a leap she hadn't planned on making. And yet, a part of her was excited. But another part was terrified. Because now she would have to spend even more time with the man she had humiliated in front of the entire company. And something told her that this was just the beginning of a much deeper and more complicated story. In this chapter, the power dynamic between Leia and Nicholas begins to shift. Nicholas, seeing something in Leia that others have missed, offers her a high-stakes opportunity. However, this move introduces both excitement and anxiety as Leia finds herself in a position that forces her to confront her own hesitations about working closely with him. It's the first step toward an emotional and professional transformation. Chapter 4: The Unexpected Offer. Leia had barely made it back to her desk before the flood of questions started. "How was it?" Clara asked, her voice brimming with curiosity. "What did he want?" Leia dropped into her chair, trying to focus on the chaos of her work, but her mind kept drifting back to Nicholas's office. His words, his gaze. That small but significant smile he had given her when she agreed to take the job. She was still reeling from it. "What did I just do?" "It was unexpected," she said, her voice shaky. She looked at her screen, but the words were nothing more than a blur. Clara raised an eyebrow. "Unexpected? What do you mean by that?" Leia hesitated. She couldn't exactly tell Clara the full story, not the part about Nicholas offering her a role that would have her working directly with him. Not yet, anyway. It still felt unreal, like a dream she might wake up from at any moment. "Offered me a role, as his personal assistant." She swallowed hard, the weight of the words sinking in. Clara's mouth dropped open. "What? No way! You're kidding!" Leia nodded, her heart still racing. "I'm not kidding. He said I have potential, that I'm not afraid to speak my mind, and he wants me to help him for the next 3 weeks." 3 weeks? Clara repeated, her voice incredulous. "What's the catch?" Leia rubbed her temples, trying to focus. "There isn't really a catch. He said if it works out, I'll get a permanent position. If not, I go back to marketing." Clara leaned forward, her eyes wide with excitement. "This is big, Leia. You realize that, right? The new CEO just noticed you, offered you a role working directly with him. That's huge. You've got to take it." "I already did," Leia said, her voice soft. Clara stared at her, clearly stunned. "Wait, you said yes?" Leia nodded. "I didn't really have much choice, did I? He offered it to me and I just said yes. I think I'm still in shock about it, to be honest." She glanced out the window, her heart racing. "But what if I mess up? What if I'm not good enough for this?" Clara laughed softly, shaking her head. "You're going to do great. Trust me. This is your chance, Leia. You've been working your ass off, and now it's paying off." Nicholas Smith doesn't just give out offers like this to anyone. Leia swallowed hard. Nicholas Smith. The name still felt strange on her tongue. This wasn't just a job. This was a chance to get to know him better, to prove herself, and to be closer to the heart of the company than she ever could have imagined. But with that excitement came a new wave of anxiety. What will he expect of me? What if I screw it up? Before she could spiral any further into doubt, her phone buzzed again. The next day, the real weight of her decision settled in. Leia walked through the front doors of the building, her steps hesitant. She wasn't sure what to expect, but one thing was clear. Everything was about to change. When she reached her desk, there was a folder waiting for her, sitting just where her coffee cup usually rested. She opened it, her heart in her throat as she flipped through the documents inside. It was a schedule, a set of instructions, and a list of meetings for the day. And at the top of the schedule, in bold letters, was her first meeting with Nicholas. Oh, God. Leia checked her watch. It was 9:00 a.m. She had 30 minutes to prepare. She tried to steady her breathing as she ran through her notes. This wasn't just another workday. She wasn't just another assistant. She was working directly with the CEO. She caught a glimpse of her reflection in the glass walls of the building's atrium. She looked just like she always did. Average, unremarkable. But today, something felt different. She felt different. You can do this, she told herself. You've got this. At 9:30 a.m., Leia was standing outside Nicholas's office, her stomach in knots. Her mind kept spinning with the thought that this was it, her chance. And as much as she hated to admit it, her thoughts weren't entirely focused on the opportunity to prove herself. They were also consumed by the fact that he, Nicholas Smith, was the man she'd be working with. As she raised her hand to knock on the door, she couldn't help but wonder, what was he really like? Her mind wandered back to the evening at the corporate event, the look in his eyes when he had smiled at her, the subtle hints of something deeper, something beyond the corporate mask he wore so well. You're overthinking this, she scolded herself, before finally knocking on the door. Come in. Leia stepped inside, her palms clammy, her breath shallow. Nicholas was sitting at his desk, papers spread out in front of him, his eyes focused on the screen of his laptop. He looked up when she entered, the same composed look on his face, but there was something about his gaze that made her feel both nervous and oddly at ease. Miss Moreira, he greeted, his voice smooth. I trust you're ready to get started? She nodded quickly, trying to suppress the nervousness that made her hands tremble slightly. Yes, Mr. Smith, ready. He smiled, that same small, knowing smile from the night before. Good. I've got a lot on my plate today, but we'll start with a simple task. I need you to review these reports and prepare an overview for me. It's an internal matter, nothing too complicated. Leia nodded again, her mind racing as she quickly took a seat across from him. She glanced at the documents on the desk, trying to appear calm. As the meeting went on, she did her best to focus, taking notes and asking questions when necessary. Nicholas spoke clearly, his voice confident, and though he seemed detached at times, Leia noticed the small, thoughtful pauses he took when explaining certain details. He wasn't just a corporate robot, he had layers. And each time he looked up at her, his eyes seemed to linger for just a second too long, almost as if he was measuring her. It wasn't until the meeting was over that she realized she had been holding her breath the entire time. Well, that's a start, he said as the meeting wrapped up, standing to his feet. I'll need your feedback by tomorrow morning. Leia stood as well, her legs a little shaky. Of course, I'll have it for you by then. Good. I'm glad you're handling this with such poise. I'll see you tomorrow. As she walked out of his office, the door closing behind her with a soft click, Leia felt her heart racing again. What just happened? The role she had taken on felt like a leap into the unknown, a leap into a world where Nicholas Smith wasn't just the CEO anymore, he was a real person, and maybe, just maybe, she was starting to see him in a way no one else had. But what did that mean for her? Leia didn't know the answer yet, but something told her she was about to find out. Chapter 5: The Distance. The next few days dragged on in a blur of meetings, reports, and coffee breaks. Leia was doing her best to keep up with the high pace, but every task felt like a reminder of how far out of her depth she was. She had never expected to be in this position, working so closely with Nicholas Smith, the new CEO. Each time she entered his office, her heart beat a little faster, her hands a little shakier. There was a strange energy between them now, one she couldn't quite understand. The small smiles, the lingering glances, the unspoken words. They were becoming too much to ignore. But as the days wore on, Leia started to notice a shift in Nicholas. It was subtle at first. He began to retreat, pulling back in meetings, his focus becoming more distant. His eyes, once filled with that curiosity, now seemed focused solely on the tasks at hand and not on her. The small moments of connection, the subtle smiles, disappeared. Leia couldn't help but feel a sting of disappointment. Had she imagined it all? Had she been reading too much into his glances, his small gestures? For the past week, their interactions had been strictly professional. He still treated her with respect, but the playful edge that had been there in the beginning was gone. It wasn't just that he was pulling away, it was the fact that she felt the distance more keenly every time she entered his office. It was as if there was a wall now, invisible but solid, that had not been there before. The turning point came one afternoon. Leia was sitting at her desk, buried in a pile of reports that Nicholas had asked her to review. She was starting to lose track of time when a soft knock sounded at her door. She looked up, her heart skipping a beat. She had barely seen him all day. "Come in," she called, trying to sound composed. When Nicholas stepped inside, his usual confident stride slowed, like something was weighing on him. He was dressed in his usual tailored suit, but there was an edge to his demeanor that she hadn't noticed before. "Miss Moreira," he greeted, his voice cool but polite. "I need those reports by the end of the day, please." Leia nodded quickly. "Of course. I'm almost done. I'll have them ready for you in an hour." "Good." Nicholas's eyes flickered to the stack of papers on her desk, his gaze lingering just a moment too long before he stepped back toward the door. "I'll see you later." He didn't say anything else, and before Leia could respond, he was gone, the door clicking softly behind him. Leia sat there for a moment, the silence in the room swallowing her. It was the way he had looked at her. Detached, like she was just another employee, just another task. It had happened so subtly that she hadn't noticed at first, but now it was clear. He was pulling away. She felt it, the coldness, the distance. The next few days passed in a blur of tasks and meetings, but each time she saw Nicholas, that distance grew. They would exchange brief pleasantries, but there was nothing more. No casual conversation, no small moments of connection. It was like she was nothing more than an assistant, nothing more than a tool for the work he needed done. At first, Leia tried to brush it off. She told herself it was just a temporary phase. It was his way of keeping things professional. But deep down she knew it wasn't just that. There was something else, something more personal, that she couldn't ignore. One afternoon, she found herself standing by the window in his office, watching the rain patter against the glass. The city outside was dark and moody, much like her mood. She couldn't understand why this was happening, why he had started to pull away. She had thought they were making progress, thought they had started to see each other as more than just boss and assistant. But now, with every passing day, she felt more invisible to him. "Miss Moreira?" His voice startled her from her thoughts, and she turned around to find him standing in the doorway. His face was unreadable, his eyes cold. She swallowed the lump in her throat and quickly turned away from the window. "Yeah, I need the updated reports," he said, his tone sharp, as if the brief, personal connection they had shared was gone. He was all business now, and it stung. Leia nodded, her throat tight. "Of course. They'll be ready in a few minutes." He didn't say anything else. He simply nodded and walked away, leaving her standing there alone, the rain outside beating against the glass like a drum. The following week, Leia couldn't shake the feeling that she was losing him. It wasn't just the way he acted in the office. It was how distant he had become outside of it as well. She hadn't heard from him in days. No small talk, no casual, "How's your day going?" She had begun to realize something. He was avoiding her. She had done something, said something, or maybe it was just the pressure of the job, but whatever it was, it had created a distance between them that she couldn't cross. And for the first time since she had started working for him, she felt small in a way she never had before. She wasn't just an assistant anymore. She was just someone who was being forgotten. It wasn't until one evening, when Leia stayed late to finish up some paperwork, that she finally got the chance to speak to him again. The office was quiet, the city outside lit with the golden glow of streetlights. She was sitting at her desk, her pen moving quickly across the paper, when she heard footsteps approaching. She looked up, her heart suddenly racing. It was Nicholas. "Miss Moreira," he said quietly, standing at her desk. "I need to talk to you." Her stomach flipped. "Of course," she said, standing up. "What's this about?" He hesitated, his gaze lingering on her face before he spoke again. "I've noticed you've been a little distant lately," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Are you okay?" Leia's chest tightened. "I'm fine, just a little overwhelmed, I guess." Nicholas nodded, his expression unreadable. "If there's anything I can do to help, let me know." He paused, watching her carefully. "I just don't want things to feel off between us." Leia felt the weight of his words. She wanted to respond, to tell him that it wasn't just about the work, that it was about the way he had been treating her. But the words wouldn't come. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded and turned to leave, but before he stepped out the door, he looked back at her one last time. "I'll see you tomorrow, Miss Moreira." Leia watched him go, the door closing softly behind him, and for the first time in days, she finally felt like she had gotten through to him. But as she sat back down at her desk, the silence of the office pressing down on her, she realized something. The distance between them wasn't just in the office. It was inside her, too. And now, the question that had been haunting her every day had finally bubbled to the surface. What did Nicholas really want from her? Chapter 6. The Confession. It had been days since their last conversation. Days since Nicholas had acknowledged the distance between them. And yet, things still felt as strained as ever. Leia found herself trapped in a strange limbo. Every interaction with him was either formal or distant, and the brief moments when their eyes met seemed to carry a heavy weight. What had started out as a mistake on her part, the wrong assumption that he was a waiter, had now morphed into something else entirely. What was this, she wondered? What was going on between them? She was sitting at her desk one afternoon, trying to focus on the reports in front of her, but her mind kept drifting back to the confusion she was feeling. The distance, the unspoken tension. What does he want from me? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden sound of her phone buzzing on the desk. A text from Nicholas. "Can we meet in my office in 20 minutes? Leia blinked, her heart skipping a beat. She had no idea what this was about, but her pulse quickened at the thought of being in the same room with him again. The 20 minutes seemed to stretch into eternity. When the clock finally struck the hour, Leia grabbed the file she was working on and made her way to his office. She tried to prepare herself mentally for whatever he had to say, but there was no preparing for what she was about to walk into. When she stepped into Nicholas's office, the first thing she noticed was how quiet it was. The usual hum of office chatter and phone calls was absent. It was just the two of them, and the air between them felt charged in a way it hadn't been before. Nicholas was standing by the window, his back to her. His posture was relaxed, but there was something about the way he held himself that told her he was tense. He didn't turn around when she walked in, and that unnerving silence stretched on for a few moments before he spoke. "Sit down, Miss Moreira," he said softly, his voice low and measured. Leia took her seat, her heart in her throat. What's going on? She couldn't tell if she was nervous or excited, or a mix of both. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something," Nicholas continued, still not facing her. "Something that's been bothering me for a while." Leia swallowed, her breath catching. What could he possibly want to talk about? "I'm not one for small talk," Nicholas said, turning to face her at last. There was a seriousness in his eyes, a depth she hadn't seen before. "So, I'll get straight to the point." Leia nodded, her hands clammy in her lap. She wanted to say something, to ask him to explain, but the words stuck in her throat. "I've been avoiding you," he said quietly, his voice almost too soft to hear. Leia blinked, the words crashing into her like a wave. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice shaking just slightly. Nicholas took a deep breath, walking over to his desk and leaning against it. "At first, I thought it was just the pressures of the job, getting to know a new team, setting things in motion. But the truth is, the more I've worked with you, the more I've noticed something. A connection. Something that shouldn't be there. And I've been avoiding it." Leia's heart skipped again. "A connection?" She stared at him, her mind racing. "But you've been distant, cold. Why?" He exhaled slowly, as though he were trying to find the right words. "Because I didn't know how to handle it. You're different, Leia. You've never been afraid to challenge me, to speak your mind, and I admire that. But the more I get to know you, the more I realize how hard it is to keep things professional. He stopped, rubbing his hand over his face as though he were trying to push back the flood of emotions that were threatening to spill over. Leia's stomach twisted. What are you trying to say? Nicholas looked at her with something raw in his gaze. I'm saying I've been holding myself back, Leia. From you. From this. He motioned between them, his eyes intense. And I can't do it anymore. Leia's breath caught in her chest. This. What was this? You're not just an employee to me anymore, Nicholas continued, his voice almost a whisper. You've become something more. Something I didn't expect. I didn't plan for it. And now, I don't know how to step back. Leia sat in stunned silence, her heart racing. She couldn't think, couldn't breathe. What is happening? I've been a fool, Leia, Nicholas said, his words so soft she could barely hear them. And I can't pretend that I don't want more. More than just work. More than just this professional relationship. I want more of you. Leia's head spun, the room feeling like it was closing in around her. She had never expected this, not in a million years. She had thought that maybe, just maybe, there had been something between them. But this was more than anything she had anticipated. I don't know how this works, he continued, his eyes never leaving hers. I don't know what it means for us, for the company. But I need you to know that I want to try with you. Her mind was racing. He wants to try. He wants more. She couldn't even process everything he had said, but one thing was clear. This moment, this conversation, had changed everything. No longer could she pretend that she was just a junior assistant to Nicholas Smith, and no longer could he pretend that they were just colleagues. Are you sure about this? Leia finally found her voice, her throat tight. Nicholas nodded slowly, his gaze steady. Yes, I'm sure. I've been trying to keep my distance for so long, but I can't anymore. And I know it's messy, I know it's complicated, but I don't want to be the guy who hides from what's real. Leia didn't know what to say. She wanted to respond, to let him know how she felt, but everything was swirling too fast. All she could manage was a whisper. I don't want to hide either. And that was it. The confession they had both been avoiding was out in the open. The walls between them were crumbling, and for the first time, Leia felt like she wasn't just someone standing in the background of Nicholas's world. She was finally seen, not just as his assistant, but as something more. Chapter 7, The Choice. The weight of Nicholas's confession hung in the air between them, the room thick with unspoken words and emotions that neither of them had fully processed until now. Leia could barely breathe, her heart hammering in her chest as she looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time since everything had shifted, Nicholas, for his part, didn't seem to move, didn't seem to breathe either. He stood there, his gaze locked on hers, the silence stretching between them like a bridge that neither of them was sure they were ready to cross. I'm not asking you to make a decision right now, Leia, he said softly, his voice like the rustle of paper in a quiet room. I just needed you to know how I feel, that I'm willing to take the risk. Leia swallowed, trying to steady the chaos in her mind. She didn't know what she felt yet. She didn't know what to say. She only knew that something between them had changed in that moment. And there was no going back. She stepped away from the desk, pacing slowly, trying to find words that could make sense of the rush of feelings coursing through her. Risk? She asked, almost breathless, her thoughts a storm. Nicholas, we're talking about us. About me working with you. About being in the same world, the same space every single day. How can that not be risky? He met her gaze, his eyes unwavering, intense. It's risky because it's not just about the work anymore, it's about everything. Us. And I don't know what that means yet, but I do know this. I don't want to pretend anymore. I don't want to hide from this. Leia's pulse was erratic as she ran her hand over her forehead, trying to make sense of what he was saying. But what about the company? What about what everyone will think? This... She gestured between them, her voice breaking. This could be a disaster. Everything could fall apart. Nicholas's jaw tightened. I know, but I've been avoiding the truth for too long, Leia. I can't keep living like this. You can't either. He stepped closer, closing the distance between them just enough for her to feel the heat of his presence. I'm giving you a choice, but I'm not asking you to decide everything right now. I just want to know where we stand. And if you feel the same way, I need you to be honest with me. Her heart felt like it was being pulled in two different directions. Everything about this, about him, about them, felt so incredibly right and yet so incredibly wrong. Her mind screamed to run, to keep her distance, to protect herself, but her heart wanted something different. She stopped pacing and looked at him, the vulnerability in his eyes matching her own. What happens if I say yes? She asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. Then we figure it out, Nicholas replied, his tone steady but warm, reassuring. Together. The words hung in the air, and for a long moment the room felt smaller, more intimate. Leia could feel her breath catch in her throat. She had spent so long building walls around herself, convincing herself that love was something she couldn't afford to care about, that connection was something she had no place for. But here, in this moment, with Nicholas standing in front of her, all of that suddenly seemed so unimportant. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle in her chest. I don't know if this is a good idea, she whispered, her voice shaky. I don't know what I'm doing, but I can't keep pretending that I don't want this. Nicholas's face softened, and for the first time in days, a real smile broke through his otherwise composed expression. Then that's a start. The next few days were a whirlwind. Leia barely had time to process the decision she had made, but somehow everything felt both terrifying and thrilling at the same time. She was officially a part of Nicholas's world now, not just as his assistant, but as something more. She wasn't sure what to call it yet, but she couldn't ignore the way everything felt when she was near him. They were careful, at first, keeping things professional in front of the rest of the team, but it wasn't easy. Every glance, every small touch, felt like it carried a weight that neither of them could deny. It was Friday when the shift in their dynamic became impossible to ignore. Nicholas had asked her to stay late to help with some last-minute preparations for an important meeting. The office was empty except for the two of them, and the hum of the air conditioning and the soft tapping of their keyboards filled the silence. Leia stood up to stretch, her body stiff from hours of sitting. She turned to face Nicholas, who was bent over a document on his desk. There was something so focused about him, so intense, that it was hard not to be drawn to him. He looked up when she moved, meeting her gaze for the briefest of moments before looking away. His eyes lingered on her lips for just a second, and then he cleared his throat, looking back at his work. Leia felt her heart race. The tension in the room was palpable now, like the air was thick with something neither of them was willing to acknowledge. But this time, she didn't want to run. She wanted to stay, to confront the feelings that had been building between them. You're quiet tonight, Nicholas said, his voice low, almost soft. Leia stepped closer to his desk, her fingers grazing the edge of the papers before her eyes met his. I was just thinking, she said quietly, about everything, about what comes next. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving hers. We don't have to figure it all out right now, Leia. We just need to take it one step at a time. One step at a time, his words echoed in her mind. The idea of taking it slow, of allowing herself to feel without fear of what came next. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I know, he said gently, his tone warm. But I'm here, Leia. I'm not going anywhere. The following week, Nicholas took her to lunch, something they had never done before. The conversation was light, casual, but underneath it all there was a sense of shifting between them. They were no longer just boss and assistant. They were two people trying to figure out what they meant to each other. As the days passed, they found themselves growing closer. There were stolen glances, soft smiles, and moments when the world outside of them seemed to fade away. But the question still loomed between them. What happens now? Chapter 8. The Decision. The days following their quiet confession felt like a delicate balance. Each moment filled with the knowledge that everything had changed, but with no clear sense of direction. Leia and Nicholas had both allowed the walls between them to fall, but they hadn't yet figured out what came next. The air between them was no longer just professional, it was thick with possibility, each glance carrying more weight than it had before, and yet neither of them had dared to fully address it. Leia couldn't stop thinking about what Nicholas had said in his office that day. "We figure it out together." He hadn't asked for anything from her. Not really. He hadn't pressured her, not even when she had hesitated, and that was the problem, wasn't it? He had given her the space to breathe, the space to decide, but now the weight of that decision felt like an anchor, pulling her deeper into a future she couldn't yet see clearly. It was early Friday morning when the decision finally hit her. She had stayed up the night before, reading through a dozen reports and proposals for a project she was now spearheading for Nicholas. As she looked through them, the familiar hum of the office and the steady tap of her keyboard felt comforting, grounding her in a world where she had once felt so small. But now, as her fingers danced over the keys, she couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. The reports were a distraction. The work was a distraction. Her mind kept drifting back to that moment in Nicholas's office when he had confessed everything. He had stripped himself of the carefully guarded facade that was part of his persona, and in doing so, he had left himself vulnerable. He had opened up to her in a way that few people ever had. And yet, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she was about to make a mistake. The feeling that she was about to make a mistake. Her phone buzzed on the desk, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Nicholas. "Can we meet at 1 o'clock? I need your thoughts on the marketing strategy moving forward. I'll have lunch brought in. We can discuss the details then." She read the message twice, the words sinking in. It was nothing out of the ordinary, just a routine meeting, but she couldn't ignore the undercurrent of something more. It was in the way he phrased it, in the words he chose. He was always so careful with his language. This was more than just work. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her thoughts. Can I do this? Can I keep working with him like this, knowing that we both feel more than just the professional connection we started with? At 1 p.m. sharp, Leia stood outside Nicholas's office once again, her pulse quickening. This had become a routine in the last few weeks, standing outside his door, trying to collect herself before entering. But today felt different. Today, everything felt heavier, as if the entire future was hanging on this moment. She knocked lightly, hearing his soft, "Come in," from inside. When she stepped into the office, she was immediately struck by the warmth of it. There was no other way to describe it. Nicholas had taken a more relaxed stance today. His suit was less formal, his sleeves rolled up slightly, his tie loosened. He was standing by the window, his gaze lost in the view of the city below, but the moment she entered, his eyes turned to meet hers. "Leia," he said, his voice warm but purposeful. "Come in, please, take a seat." She walked in slowly, her heart beating a little faster than she expected. She sat across from him at the desk, the space between them feeling both intimate and professional all at once. "I wanted to talk," Nicholas began, his voice steady, "about what happens next, about us." Leia felt a lump rise in her throat, but she nodded, forcing herself to stay calm. "I think we both know we've been avoiding this conversation. I've been trying to sort through my own feelings, Nicholas. I don't want to make a decision based on emotions alone." "I'm not asking you to," he said, his eyes searching hers. "I know this isn't simple, but I don't want to ignore what's happening between us. We can't keep pretending that we're just two colleagues anymore. I care about you, Leia, more than I've ever cared about anyone." Leia's heart skipped. More than he's ever cared about anyone? She tried to steady herself, but the truth was, she was afraid. Afraid of what would happen if they crossed this line. Afraid of the consequences it could have for both of them. "What are we doing, Nicholas?" Her voice was soft, uncertain. "What happens after we make this decision? After we go beyond the professional? How do we go back to the way things were?" Nicholas shook his head, his expression gentle but firm. "We don't go back, Leia. We move forward. Together. And if it doesn't work, we deal with it. But I don't want to hide anymore. I'm done hiding from what I feel. I'm ready for whatever comes next, even if it's messy." The air between them grew heavy as the weight of his words settled in. The last wall between them had fallen, and now there was nothing left but the truth. Leia sat there, the silence filling the room. She had been running from her own feelings, from the fear of what would happen if she allowed herself to fall for someone like Nicholas. Someone who was everything she had never imagined could be within reach. He was powerful, driven, untouchable. And yet, here he was, admitting that he wanted something with her that wasn't just about the job. He wanted her. Her chest tightened with the weight of it all. But there was something else, something she hadn't expected. A spark of hope, a flicker of excitement. "I don't want to run anymore either," Leia said, her voice quiet but steady. "I want to see where this goes. I want to figure it out, with you." Nicholas's face softened, and for the first time in a long while he allowed himself a full smile. "Then that's a start." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur as they worked together on the marketing strategy. But the shift was undeniable. Every touch, every glance felt like a promise, a quiet understanding that their relationship was no longer just about work. As the day drew to a close, Leia stood by the window, looking out over the city skyline. She could still feel the weight of Nicholas's words, his confession hanging in the air between them. And for the first time, she felt like she wasn't just an assistant to him. She was something more. And maybe, just maybe, this would be the beginning of something real. Chapter 9. The Future Ahead. The days after their confession felt like a blur. The air between Nicholas and Leia had shifted, no longer filled with the awkwardness of unspoken words. It was as if a new chapter had begun for them. One that didn't have a clear direction yet, but one that was theirs to navigate together. The office felt different now. Quieter somehow, but in a way that made her feel more alive than she had in months. Leia found herself watching Nicholas more closely, observing how he worked, how he interacted with the team, how he carried the weight of being CEO with such effortless precision. She was fascinated by him, but it wasn't just his professionalism that intrigued her. It was the parts of him that no one else saw, the quiet moments when he let down his guard, the rare glimpses of vulnerability that showed through when he thought no one was looking. It was that side of him that made her heart flutter. The man who stood in front of a crowd, commanding attention, was the same man who quietly sought her advice when making decisions, who valued her opinion and trusted her more than anyone else. But with that trust came an unspoken question. What would happen if the world knew about them? Their connection, their feelings. They had already crossed so many boundaries, professionally and personally, and now they were standing at the precipice, looking down at an uncertain future. That uncertainty was what terrified Leia the most. She had never been one to rush into things. She had spent most of her life second-guessing herself, hesitating at every crossroad. But with Nicholas, the stakes felt different. The risks felt bigger. And yet, when she was with him, everything just seemed right. It was Friday afternoon when the conversation came. Though Leia had been anticipating it for days, Nicholas had asked her to meet him in his office after work hours. His message was brief, as it always was. "We need to talk about what's next." Leia's heart leapt into her throat as she made her way to his office. What does he mean by that? She wondered. Were they really ready to discuss what came after everything they had shared? After everything that had changed between them? She stood in front of his door, pausing for a moment before knocking softly. His voice rang out from inside. "Come in." When she stepped inside, Nicholas was standing by the window again, staring out at the city below. He turned as she entered, a small smile pulling at the corners of his lips, though his eyes still carried that familiar intensity. "Miss Moreira," he greeted, his voice calm but laced with something deeper. Or should I say Leia? She hesitated for a second. "Leia's fine." He chuckled softly, the sound warm and familiar. "Good. It's strange, you know, calling you Miss Moreira all the time. I've gotten used to it, but I think it's time to change things. Don't you?" Leia's pulse quickened. This was it. This was the conversation she had been bracing herself for. "Sit with me," Nicholas said, motioning to the chair in front of his desk. "Let's talk about what happens next." She sat down slowly, her hands folded in her lap. She felt nervous, uncertain, but also ready. She had spent so long waiting for this moment, for him to finally acknowledge what they both knew had been growing between them. "I've been thinking a lot about this," Nicholas began, pacing in front of her. "About where we go from here. I know it hasn't been easy, and I know that the work we do here, well, it complicates things. But I also know that this—" He paused, glancing at her as if measuring his words. "This isn't something I'm willing to ignore anymore." Leia felt her heart race in her chest. This wasn't just about the company anymore. It wasn't just about the role he had offered her or the reports she had been working on. It was about them, about their connection. And now, he was giving her the choice. "I want you to know something, Leia," Nicholas continued, his voice soft but steady. "You're more than just an assistant to me. You're more than just someone I work with. I know this isn't simple, but what I feel for you, it's real. And I can't keep pretending it's just work between us. Not anymore." Leia looked up at him, her breath catching in her throat. This was it. She had been waiting for him to say those words, to admit it out loud, and now that he had, the weight of it was overwhelming. She had been afraid of what this would mean, afraid of what it might cost her. But now, as he stood there, looking at her with those same deep, searching eyes, she realized something. She wasn't afraid anymore. "I feel the same way," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I've tried to ignore it, tried to tell myself that this was just a phase, but I can't anymore. What we have, what's between us, it's not something I'm willing to walk away from." Nicholas stepped closer, his gaze softening. "Then we're in this together, no matter what happens." The next few weeks felt like they were suspended in time. Leia and Nicholas, now no longer just boss and assistant, started to navigate the delicate balance of their new relationship. They still kept things mostly professional in the office, but there were moments, small moments, when the walls between them came down, when they allowed themselves to feel the connection they had been holding back for so long. They would steal quiet moments, sharing quick glances or soft smiles, their hands brushing against each other in passing. It wasn't the grand gestures of romance that most people expected, but it was enough for them. It was real, and it was theirs. But as much as they tried to keep things under wraps, the weight of their connection couldn't stay hidden forever. Word began to spread among the team, whispers, glances, questions. Leia noticed the way people looked at her when they thought she wasn't looking, the way they began to talk about her and Nicholas behind closed doors. One afternoon, after a particularly tense meeting, Leia found herself alone in the break room, trying to shake off the lingering stress of the day. She had been doing her best to ignore the rumors that were slowly starting to trickle through the company, but it was becoming harder and harder. Clara walked in, her usual confident stride a little slower than usual. "Leia," she said, her voice soft, "I just want you to know that whatever's going on between you and Nicholas—" Leia held up a hand, cutting her off. "Clara, I don't know what you've heard, but Clara smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "Don't worry about it. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. It's not easy, you know, being the person everyone's whispering about." Leia let out a breath, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. "I'm okay. I just don't know what's next. Nicholas and I, She hesitated, unsure how much to say. "We're figuring things out." "I know," Clara said softly, her expression unreadable. "Just be careful, okay? No one's saying anything, but people are watching. It won't be long before someone tries to make this into a bigger thing than it is." Leia nodded, grateful for Clara's understanding, but the words stuck with her as she walked back to her desk. The future was uncertain, and she wasn't sure what it held for her and Nicholas. But one thing was clear. She was no longer going to let fear hold her back. Chapter 10. The New Beginning. The week since Nicholas and Leia had confessed their feelings for each other had felt like both a whirlwind and a slow, steady climb. Every day brought new challenges. Whispers from the office, the uncertainty of what their future together would look like, and the overwhelming pressure of balancing their professional lives with the undeniable pull between them. But through it all, they had continued to move forward. Not just as colleagues, not just as boss and assistant, but as something more, something real. Leia stood by the window at her office, looking out over the city below. The hustle of Manhattan felt so far away, the noise and energy of the streets muted by the glass that separated her from the world. For the first time in weeks, she felt calm, at peace. Everything felt like it was finally falling into place. But there was still one more thing they had to face. Nicholas had been distant these last few days, pulled into meetings and corporate responsibilities, his focus consumed by the company's future. It was a stark contrast to the small moments they had shared, the stolen glances and brief exchanges that had kept the spark between them alive. Leia had spent the last few days wondering if he was pulling back again, wondering if he was just as scared as she was about what came next. She glanced at her watch. It was 4:30 p.m. and he hadn't called or texted. He had mentioned that they would meet after the final round of meetings, but there had been no word. She had tried to focus on her work, but it was hard to shake the feeling that something was off. With a sigh, she grabbed her phone and texted him. "Are we still on for the meeting tonight?" It took a moment before his reply came through. "Yes, I'll be there in 30. We need to talk." Leia's heart skipped. The words echoed in her mind. "We need to talk." She had heard those words before, and they never led to anything good. But this time, she wasn't afraid. Whatever happened between them, whatever decision they had to make, it was time to face it head-on, together. At 5:00 p.m. sharp, Leia walked into the conference room where Nicholas was already waiting. The usual calm, composed CEO she had come to know was absent today. His suit was less pristine, his tie loose, his sleeves rolled up as if he had just come from a meeting. His eyes met hers with that familiar intensity, but today there was something more, something vulnerable, something that made Leia's heart race. She stepped forward, her steps slower than usual, the weight of the conversation hanging heavily in the air. "I wasn't sure how to approach this," Nicholas said, his voice low but steady. He motioned for her to take a seat across from him. "But I think it's time we address where we go from here." Leia sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She couldn't meet his eyes immediately. Instead, she looked at the papers in front of her on the table, unsure of how to start. She could feel the heat of his gaze on her, like a quiet challenge to be brave. "I'm ready," she said, finally lifting her eyes to meet his. Nicholas exhaled slowly. "You know that I care about you, Leia, more than I've ever cared about anyone in this company. But this, what we're doing, it's not just about us anymore. It's about what happens next, about the risks we're both taking, not just with our relationship, but with everything we've worked for, our jobs, our futures. And I want to know if you're ready for all of it, if you're ready to take the leap." Leia felt a wave of emotion crash over her. This wasn't just about feelings anymore. This was about decisions that would impact everything. She had been so focused on the fear of what might happen, but now, as she sat across from him, the decision felt clearer than ever. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice steady but her heart racing. Nicholas looked at her, his expression unreadable, but his eyes spoke volumes. There was fear in them, yes, but there was something else, too. "Hope. I've never been more sure of anything in my life," he said, his voice firm. "I want this, with you. I want a future with you. I don't want to run from this anymore." Leia nodded slowly, her heart swelling with emotion. She had known for a while that this was what she wanted too. The uncertainty, the risk, it all seemed small now compared to the possibility of a life shared with someone who truly saw her, who truly knew her. "I'm ready too," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. "I don't know what comes next, but I know that I want to figure it out with you, whatever it takes." Nicholas's face softened, a slow smile spreading across his lips. "Then let's do this," he said, his voice full of quiet determination. "Together." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the office emptied out, Leia and Nicholas walked side by side out of the building. The city was alive with its usual energy, but for the first time the noise didn't overwhelm her. Instead, it felt like the backdrop to a new beginning. The uncertainty that had clouded her thoughts for weeks had finally cleared, and in its place was something unexpected, a sense of peace. She didn't know what the future held, and neither did Nicholas, but they were ready to face it. Together. As they walked toward the subway station, Nicholas's hand brushed against hers, and she didn't pull away. Instead, she let her fingers slip between his, feeling the warmth of his hand in hers. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like everything. They didn't need to say anything more. They didn't need to make promises they couldn't keep. All they needed was to take it one step at a time. And for the first time, Leia felt confident in their future. Because with Nicholas by her side, she knew she was ready to face whatever came next. As a new chapter. The weeks that followed their decision were nothing like Leia had imagined. The transition from professional colleagues to partners in every sense of the word was both exhilarating and terrifying. The first few days were filled with quiet moments of shared smiles and stolen glances across the office. Nicholas still held on to the professional mask during meetings and in front of the rest of the team. But when it was just the two of them, that mask slipped away, and the connection between them grew stronger. Leia had never been someone to shy away from hard work, but this was different. Working alongside Nicholas wasn't just about getting the job done, it was about building something together. Every meeting, every decision, was a chance for them to see the world from each other's perspectives. They learned, they adapted, and slowly they built a rhythm that felt natural, even though everything about it was new. They didn't have all the answers. Neither of them knew what their future held, but they didn't need to know. For the first time in her life, Leia felt like she wasn't chasing after something or trying to prove her worth. She was simply being, and with Nicholas beside her, she felt more grounded than ever before. But the challenges weren't over. The whispers in the office didn't stop. There were moments when Leia would catch someone's eye, only to look away quickly, the silent judgment hanging in the air. It wasn't just the team who had noticed their growing closeness. It was everyone. The office politics had always been complicated, but now there was an added layer of tension that neither she nor Nicholas could ignore. Yet through it all, they stood firm. Every challenge they faced together. Nicholas never backed down, never hesitated to defend her when the rumors started to swirl. And Leia, who had once been unsure of her place in this world, now found herself standing tall beside him, no longer afraid of what others thought. It was a Saturday evening when they took their first real break, just the two of them. Nicholas had insisted on taking her to a small park near his apartment, a place he had found years ago and kept to himself, away from the business world and the spotlight. It was quiet, the kind of place where you could hear the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of the city without being overwhelmed by it. They sat on a bench under the shade of a large oak tree, the light from the street lamps casting long shadows across the ground. For once, the world around them felt still. It wasn't a glamorous moment, and it wasn't a scene out of a romance novel. But it was theirs. "I've been thinking," Nicholas said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Uh-oh," Leia teased, her lips curving into a smile. "Thinking's usually a dangerous thing for you." He chuckled, his eyes twinkling in the dim light. "I was thinking about how far we've come, how much has changed in such a short time." Leia looked at him, feeling the weight of his words. She had been thinking the same thing. So much had changed. When she first started at the company, she never could have imagined that she would be sitting here with him in a park at the edge of the city talking about their future together. "I never expected any of this," she said quietly. "Not in a million years." "Neither did I," Nicholas replied, his voice low, thoughtful. "But I'm glad it happened, glad it's us." Leia smiled, her heart swelling with a warmth she couldn't explain. "Yeah," she said softly. "Me too." The world around them felt smaller, more intimate in that moment. They didn't need to say anything more. The truth was in the way their hands brushed against each other, in the way their eyes met with unspoken understanding. They were both scared. Scared of the future, scared of what the world might say, scared of what might happen when they let their guard down. But at that moment, sitting on that park bench with a man who had once seemed so far out of reach, Leia realized something. She didn't need to have all the answers. She didn't need to have it all figured out. All she needed was the courage to keep moving forward, one step at a time, with him by her side. In the days that followed, the tension in the office began to ease. The whispers, though they still lingered, were no longer as loud. Nicholas and Leia didn't hide their relationship. They didn't have to. They were both confident in their decisions, and while the world around them might have had its opinions, they knew what mattered. Their connection, their trust, their love. They continued to work together, side by side, building not only the company's future, but their own. And through it all, they never stopped learning from each other. They pushed each other to be better, not just in their work, but in their lives. Their journey together was just beginning, but they had already come so far. Months later, at the company's holiday party, Nicholas stood beside Leia at the center of the ballroom, his hand resting gently on her back. It was the first time they had attended the event together as a couple, and despite the glances and quiet murmurs, they both stood tall, confident, and unafraid. As the night drew to a close, Nicholas leaned in close to her ear, his breath warm against her skin. "Are you ready for the next chapter?" he asked, his voice full of promise. Leia turned to him, a soft smile on her lips. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life." The crowd around them seemed to blur as she met his gaze. In that moment, nothing else mattered. They had chosen each other. They had taken the leap, and no matter what the future held, they knew one thing: they would face it together. With that, Nicholas took her hand in his, and they walked forward, into the unknown, into the future they had built, step by step, side by side. Love is not about having all the answers, but about having the courage to take the first step, even when the path ahead is uncertain. It's about choosing to trust, to be vulnerable, and to face the unknown together. True love doesn't come without its challenges, but when it's built on a foundation of respect, understanding, and mutual growth, it becomes a bond that can withstand anything. As you watch Nicholas and Leia move forward, think about your own journey. What risks are you willing to take for the sake of love? What steps will you take to build the future you want, even if it's uncertain? Take a moment to reflect and share your thoughts with us. What does love and trust mean to you? And remember, just like Nicholas and Leia, sometimes the hardest part is the first step, but when you take it, you may just find that it's the beginning of something beautiful.